الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. There's a hadith at this time that we often hear, especially because we know that many organizations, they seek support and they seek our aid in Ramadan, and there's precedent for that. And the hadith that's in question here is the hadith that's in Sahih Muslim. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أجود الناس بالخير. That the Prophet ﷺ was the most generous of people. وكان أجود ما يكون في شهر رمضان. And he used to be the most generous. He was already the most generous, but then he would be even more generous in the month of Ramadan. إن جبريل يلقاه في كل سنة في شهر رمضان حتى ينسلخ. That Jibreel alayhi salam used to meet the Prophet ﷺ every year in Ramadan. فيعرض عليه القرآن فيعرض رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عليه القرآن. The Prophet ﷺ used to recite to Jibreel alayhi salam the Quran. فإذا لقيه جبريل كان أجود من الريح المرسلة. And when Jibreel alayhi salam used to meet him, when Jibreel alayhi salam used to meet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was more generous than the blowing wind. When the wind blows, it doesn't discriminate. It touches everyone. So the khayr of the Prophet ﷺ, whether that be in monetary aid or whether that be in spiritual benefit, through the teaching of knowledge, through the imparting of advice, all of that is khayr that the Prophet ﷺ was generous with, and he would become even more generous. So often the focus of this hadith is the generosity. I want to take this from a different angle, and by no means am I the first one to do so. If we look at the sharh of Imam Nawawi, of his commentary on this hadith, from amongst the fawaid of this hadith, he mentions that there is that when you meet the salihin, when you meet the righteous, as the ta'athur بسبب تأثر لقائهم, because the effect of coming into contact with the salihin, with the righteous, there is an increase in your goodness, and there is an increase in the righteousness that you embody. So when the Prophet ﷺ would come into contact with Jibreel alayhi salam, and he would recite to him the Quran, he would increase in his generosity. This is the effect of coming into proximity and being in the company of the righteous, where the meeting of Jibreel alayhi salam would be a stimulus for the generosity of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now when we look at it and you say, I want to be generous in Ramadan, how do we become generous? How do we inculcate that in our life? The answer is actually pretty simple. That when we interact with the Quran, we are now in the company of Allah. إِلَّا كُنَّا عَلَيْكُمْ شُهُودًا إِذْ تُفِيضُونَ فِيهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Yunus that when you recite the Quran, وَلَا تَعْمَلُونَ مِنْ عَمَلٍ إِلَّا كُنَّا عَلَيْكُمْ شُهُودًا, that you don't do any action. And then even before that is what you recite from the Quran. Whatever you do, Allah is witness. And when you're reciting the Quran, there's a specific and there's a very particular proximity that one has to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is the most generous of the generous. So when you come into contact with the Quran, the kalam, the speech of the one who is the most generous, then the effect of that will also be upon you. Those who you are with, you want to be like them. So when a person spends time with the Quran, then a person by themselves intrinsically wants to be generous, because the Quran is the generosity, it is the greatest generosity that we have received from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wahi and revelation is the greatest jood, is the greatest generosity that we have received through the barakah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Ahlul Quran, the people of Quran, are Ahlul Jood, they're people of generosity. So this Ramadan, make yourself from the people of Quran, and you will automatically become a person of generosity.